And I went round the side and I could see smoke wrapping out of another door, another entrance to another flat. So clearly I'd kicked the own door in.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another in the series of podcasts called Life After the Pips, which is about serving in the public service and then retiring, looking at impacts that it has on your family life, your private life. And I'm delighted to be joined online by Carl Boasman, who's a ex-senior officer from Cleveland Fire Brigade. Welcome, Carl.
Hi, Dave. Nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
No, not a problem. It's very much unscripted, Carl. I've just got a couple of questions that I won't want to try and get in, but that will hopefully encourage you to come out of that little fire brigade shell of yours and just talk to us and get through the podcast. So, what I'd like to start off with, Carl, if possible, is what was your motivation for joining the secondary emergency service as opposed to the police?
Well, sort of we know it is a primary emergency service, Dave, as well. You'll know it. Yeah. So I've got to say, when I think back to when I joined the fire service back in 1992, it was always my kind of, I'm going to use the word, childhood ambition to join the fire and rescue service. From being very young, I can never really think of anything else that I ever wanted to do, and I was fortunate enough to go through selection and pass the selection process for the fire and rescue service back in 1991. I was 19 years old and I joined and I started on my recruits course on the 17th of September 1992. So I was absolutely overjoyed to be in the service and couldn't quite believe it. I'd worked very hard to pass the selection process and pass the tests. And back in the day, that there was about 2,500, 3,000 applicants for 20 jobs, and I don't think that's changed at all throughout my 31-year career. It's always been a very attractive job for many different reasons, as the emergency services is. But I've got to say, I've got skills today, and it's a 31-year career, and retired after a very enjoyable and a very proud career in October 23, 31 years service.
Brilliant. What your service itself then, Carl, if you don't mind talking about that a little bit, what did did you progress? Did you do different jobs within the service?
I did. I joined as a firefighter. I was attached to Blue Watch at Harrogate, and a brilliant watch where I served like 8 years on and off for Harrogate on Blue Watch, Red Watch, and White Watch. Three fantastic watches. And I've got to be honest, I thought I'd won the lottery. I thought I'd get to, go to fires, drive the fire engine. I got to, to do the thing, serve the public, and do, the work that the fire and rescue service does is very valuable, as is all emergency services. But I think, I've got to say that stage in my career after, so I had 6 years really where I doing what were the statutory examinations, and we had three kind of levels to pass. One was leading firefighter, and in today's money, that's crew manager. There was then your field officer examination, which is now watch manager, and then there was your station officer examination, which was now station manager. So they were the three kind of gateways by which to progress through your career, and there were two parts. You had a written part and a practical part. And yeah, I took my leading firefighters exams. I did my small officers and then latterly did my station officers exam. But it was my first station officer who gave me an opportunity after 2 years, after I passed my probation, to act up in the role of leading firefighter. And that was in charge of a fire engine, fire appliance crew, vastly more experienced than I was. They were the ones that were looking after me in many ways. But it was an opportunity that I took and an opportunity that I enjoyed. And I think just having that responsibility and having that extra kind of aspect on the job was really interesting. I think that's sort of ignited, but if that's the word, my sort of desire to sort of progress. From that point, I then progressed to as officer in the training school back then in centre. I spent a few years, very happy years training firefighters in parts of their job. I was fortunate enough to become the training secretary, where I stayed for a couple of years um, to do district man as a station manager for around 2 or 3 years, looking after various geographical areas. And progressed on to be a group manager, which is in charge of a larger geographical area. And at one point, I think I had 13 fire stations. Did that for a long time. Did that with group manager for just under 8 years. Did lots of different roles within that, including looking after fire stations, geographical areas, and specialist functions. And it was at that point after about 8 years where I was, it was the same hard. Who gave me my first break. It was a great progression. He gave me a nudge to say, look, there's a vacancy coming up on the senior team. Would like to apply. And I went through the process. I was fortunate to pass that and be an area manager part of the management board, as was there. Did that for 4 years. Manage a number of areas across the service at strategic level in North Yorkshire. And then I moved to Cleveland in 2020 as the Assistant Chief Fire Officer, Director of Community Protection, where I served just under 4 very happy years there. So in total, 31 years, a real brief snapshot. But I think
Yeah.
for me, the bit that I never really had any serious ambitions to get to the top to be a principal officer where I ended up, more
Yeah.
about just getting to the level that I was at, thinking I want to be good at this. And then actually, I'll have a think about the next one. So there was never really a grand plan, but pretty proud to have sort of achieved firefighter to assistant chief fire officer in my career. So yeah, a fantastic, interesting career. Feel very fortunate to have had it.
Yeah. So as you've progressed up the ladder then, Carl, what impact has your own well-being as well as the well-being of your team, what impact has that had for you?
I think as you go through the different levels of leadership, when you are in that supervisory middle manager role in those sort of operational tactical levels, your responsibility for your teams sort of grows. So you start off with having responsibility for one crew of people, and then you end up your responsibility for 13, 14, 15 fire stations. But then you've also got your operational level, and you're in charge of some significant incidents as an advanced tactical commander. And sometimes you have 25, 30 fire engines at your disposal to deal with a significant incident. And I think, the safety and well-being of the teams has always been absolute priority. When you get into the strategic roles, you become responsible for the service as a whole. And I've always maintained sort of health and safety and well-being as a responsibility throughout my career at all levels.
Mhm.
And it's been rewarding to have influence over ensure the right provisions in place for staff and making sure that they've got access to it from mental health, well-being, all for your own well-being as well. And I think a reflection on my career is that that does weigh quite heavily. I mean, and not forgetting the level of trauma that you can be subject to in terms of traumatic experience. And I think, certainly during my operational career, exposed to a significant amount of trauma as getting a colleague. And that does have an impact on you. And as you sort of progress into the strategic level, you take that with you and you're kind of carrying with you to make sure that the right provisions are in place to look after yourself and your own kind of being as well. At the senior levels, get the pressure of leadership, managing a big organization, the political challenges, the all of the things that come with these senior roles.
Mhm.
That can and does have an impact. And I think, I'm mindful of my colleagues who many which are still serving. I think on a day-to-day basis, the higher up the tree you get, so to speak, the lonelier it can be. In many ways, you have a bigger team around you. For instance, part of a senior team, it's a fairly small peer group. And I think it's a couple of things about just making sure that we do keep talking about mental health, do keep talking about provision for your own mental health and well-being, but also making sure that when you're in those senior positions that you keep a focus on your team and the wider service. And I think
Yeah.
There are, within the family rescue service, we are fortunate to have a firefighters charity that is open to all serving fighters, support staff, and their families. And that is also available to you after retirement. Well, and I know that many of my colleagues have access level of support both during the service, after the service. And I know that some police and within health, there are some, charitable organisations and apps. So I think the provision across the certain island service has got better, and in 31 years, it's unrecognisable in many ways. I know that you and I joined the idea of accessing counselling for trauma support, not even discussed. And we know that people have left the service after being exposed to significant trauma and really the support mechanisms weren't. Um, and I think nowadays had that been the case, and it was more acceptable to raise your hand and ask for help, and stigma around accessing mental health support is getting less. And in many services, the culture is still trying to stick your hand up and say that we need help. And I think on reflection, after leaving the fire rescue service and sort of starting my own business and working with sort of private organisations, I think the emergency services do in a positive culture around using mental health, but also so it should because they're exposed to a lot of trauma, a lot of pressure, a lot of stress over very lots of the.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. It is so important. But did it have any sort of particular impact on you as you were progressing through the ranks and your family life?
Yeah, I think there was a particular period in my career where I was a stage middle manager level, and as part of that role, you do go up to incidents on your own in a car, and that's the transition from going out in a in a place with 4 people, 4 or 5 people, and then all of a sudden you find yourself on your own. And by virtue of the fact that you're covering a large geographical area, and particularly within North Yorkshire, which is a service I was in at the time, a lot of the incidents I was attending were road collisions, with sadly very traumatic outcomes and a lot of fatalities. And I think in 1 year, I was exposed to a significant amount of trauma in that role. And by sort of coincidence, I'd become a dad for the first time. And my eldest son, who's now 20, um, who would think he was born. And I think what I realized now on reflection, after having some support for dealing with some very traumatic incidents, was that as a parent, as a young parent, your worldview changes. And perhaps as a young single man to that point, the impact of some of the incidents that I'd attended didn't really have the same level of gravity as they did when I was a parent. And I can remember quite clearly coming back from a couple of incidents, sadly involving children, and really thinking deeply about how on earth I would deal with that if that was my family.
Yeah,
And what I learned through accessing some trauma support and some counselling over a period of time was that we all naturally make links to our own circumstances, and and when you become a parent, your worldview changes. You are vulnerable to the suffering and in particular, if it's children or people in your circumstance.
yeah,
You you can't help but make those links, and I think in access that trauma support and counselling and working through that process, an awful lot better for it. And I do wonder sometimes if I hadn't have accessed the
yeah,
trauma support, I wonder if I could have gone on and continued my career and kept dealing with the same. I actually ended up doing an MBA a few years later at Teesside University, and I wrote a dissertation on the subject around um, fighters' preferences for receiving trauma support. And it was really useful because when I went through a senior role a year later, I could use that information to inform the services that were provided for
yeah,
firefighters. So it was a really
mhm,
useful experience. And I think having had that lived experience and having gone through that process,
yeah,
I am a huge advocate for mental health support. I'm a huge advocate for removing stigma of mental support within the workplace. And actually being brave enough to put your hand up and say, I'm struggling with this and I need some support.
mhm,
Certainly there are people out there that probably will be going through that process now. There's maybe people out there that don't realize they're in that need
yeah.
of help. What I would say is do, pick the phone up, do what you need to do because you're better for it. Actually, sometimes when you get yourself into a mindset, it's very difficult to think your way out of it.
Yeah. It is, and it, from when we first joined the service, I joined the police service in 1990. So from our point of view, it's a very macho thing not to, you shouldn't be asking for support. You should just get on and do your job. And it's good to see that there has been advances in both organisations in relation to making sure. I mean, let's be fair. It's okay not to. It's okay to say you're not okay. And I know that's somebody else's tagline, but at the end of the day, it's so important to encourage people to talk when they've been through a traumatic incident. So sorry, go on.
Yeah, and I think maybe just to sort of add to that, Dave, I think that's the message. And I think one of the responsibilities that I certainly held close to me as a senior leader was if it's okay for me as the boss to talk about it, it's okay for everybody else to talk about it. And I did used to spend a lot of time going out to see the watches and the crews and support staff, and we'd often talk about this. And in particular, if I knew that a particular watch or shift had been out to a traumatic incident, I'd just make a point of opening up a conversation and very often, people once people start to talk about it and once they see that the
Hmm.
senior leadership of the organisation is absolutely behind them in terms of it's okay not to be okay and it's okay to talk about it, that can remove so much stigma and so much barriers. And I know that many of my colleagues sort of will do that to this day and
Good.
can only improve the culture within.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Totally agree. Yeah. So approaching retirement, then, how did that impact on you? How did you feel?
Yeah, it was a really strange kind of thing because I looked at myself one day and thought, I've got 10 years left before I've got the option. And then all of a sudden, I got to 30 years. And it was one of the points which I could have chosen to go. And I think at that point, I wasn't ready. 30 years. But I gave it another year and gave it some serious thought about what the future holds and what the future options are. And the time that I got to 31 years, I was happy to leave the fire and rescue service and actually try something else. And one of the ambitions that I had in my life was to build business. And it was to perhaps work with some other organizations as an associate, which I've subsequently gone on to do. And a huge learning curve. And I think, you go from running a busy fire and rescue service to then running your own business, as many of us kind of do. But it's been a really huge sort of learning curve. But of course, the bit that you don't know before you leave is it's a huge leap into the unknown. And when I think back to some of the thoughts I was having at that time, and I still hold my the people I work with in my previous jobs, both North Yorkshire and Cleveland, very close to me heart. There's some wonderful people, and I still miss them. I still miss and some of that stuff, and I don't think I ever will. I don't think there'll be a time when I won't be grateful for that. I would. I know, but the sun, not so much. If the interest when, but for the majority of people that I work with, I still remember them fondly. And
Brilliant.
I'm actually doing some work at the moment where I'm in contact with some of my colleagues from both North Yorkshire and Cleveland. And
Mhm,
even today I've seen, and it's really great to see them. And
mhm.
so the leap was leaving a busy, responsible job and then going into that whole what next? Or
Yeah.
that area of uncertainty in your life that I
Yeah.
don't ever think compare yourself for. Because somebody did say to me, and it was really helpful, a colleague that we've had a few years previously said, have a plan.
Yeah.
Don't retire and go, what next? It's got to be have a plan. And that was probably the most useful piece of advice that I had, because, I've known colleagues who have met, and then gone, "Right, what now?" Um, I think at that point, you've got to sort of get some traction moving. But as I was, my heart and my soul was absolutely in my day job up until the last stage. But I'd already started to think about what next and to explore some of the options as you would natural.
Yeah.
And I think as I was approaching retirement, it was important that you had the support of my family, your friends, um, and in many ways, because I'd done it for so long,
Mhm.
that's all people had ever known me do. That's all my children, all my sons had ever known me do.
Mhm.
It's all my friends had ever known me do. And in many ways, whilst you should never let anything define you, by virtue of the fact that it is a vocation, it is something that absolutely absorbs your life and consumes your life. You can't help it. And I think, that identity piece that goes along with having that sort of role is something that it is an adjustment. And I think to do anything for that period of time, I was mindful that I would need to go through a period of adjustment in my life to get head out of, right, it's not anymore. Actually, into this is now me. So what I've found, is that there is a huge growth. Uh, and nobody treats you any differently, because all of a sudden you go put a resume on and come to work. My friends are still my friends. There
Yeah.
are wonderful records, very good friends outside the fire rescue service. But nothing has ever changed. I've met them through my new business ventures.
Yeah.
I, I stay in touch with some people from my old service, and I think that is a really nice balance. And, as
Mhm.
I already said, I still remember my previous colleagues very fondly. It's nice to see them. But actually, there is a period of adjustment, and
Mhm.
many people I've spoken to from before that period of it is so difficult for people, and would be. Uh, I'm sure I've had moments of uncertainty where you thought, "Wow, have we done the right thing?
Yeah.
Have I not done the
Yeah.
right?" You got back. They are fleeting moments,
Mhm.
and I think they are an actual adjustment process that you go through whenever you leave any life's vocation, and then you move into your next kind of chapter of your life.
Yeah.
And, I think, what I do see is that I see many of my colleagues who have sort of left and gone on to be very successful in whatever they do, and that sometimes might just be just being themselves and doing what they want to do, or actually, people like yourself, like me, that have started new business ventures and exploring different kind of sectors. But I think it comes down to, you are who you are,
Mhm.
and, your family, your friends, your network, that is the thing that what really matters in life. And the job that you had, the vocation that you had, the difference
Yeah.
that you made,
Mhm.
somebody else's turn. And somebody gave me a really great piece of advice that I've passed on to friends and colleagues, is that really whenever you're in a job like the emergency services in positions of health, you're only ever really keeping for the next person. And it's the idea of stewardship, that you do what you can with it you are there, and
Yeah.
then you leave it in good order or better order for the next person, and hopefully I did. And it's really great to see that, services, when you look back and you see what's happening in the service now, it's great to see that work continues, and but also, well, time's really short and time's precious, and I love books, and I've read a few books recently that have had a real impact on me, called, 4 Weeks, by an author called Oliver Boatman, and he talks about this notion that the average, person stays on the planet for around 4,000 weeks. And
Mhm.
he's kind of talking around what you want to do with your 4,000 weeks, and the book kind of presents this idea that your conveyor belt of time, when you're working full time, full on, just contains time is whizzing past you, containers of time fly past you, and how many containers of leisure time you put in, time for your friends and time for yourself and personal de
Yeah.
and it makes a really good point. Like, so how do you all the work is it going through your hour? They won't get any less. It gets quick. And then you haven't stepped off from overhead for
Mhm.
a little while. It's easy to sort of see how you can get wrapped up in it. in a really
Yeah.
busy day job. But it also time to think about how valuable the remaining number of weeks I've got left on the planet. And I think I've had about 2,700. So I I aim to use my remaining weeks, God willing, as
Yeah.
best I can. So he had a really somewhere, sort of passed it on to a few friends,
Good.
and it's amazing, when you get sort of past 50, personally for me, I found that time seems to fly.
Yeah, it does. I remember looking at my service and thinking, "Oh, I've got 10 years to go." Next minute, I was preparing for walking out the door and not coming back.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it does pass very quickly. And I know some of the things that you're up to at the moment, and I know that you're helping out with the fire at the wildfires just outside Scarborough. So well done on that. So if you could give somebody, I know you've given that piece of advice. Would you do it again, Carl? Would you start over again?
Yeah, it struck me in the last sort of 10 years of my career when I would stand up and welcome new trainees into the service on their induction evening, or I'd go and see the latest trainee course. I'd kind of said a couple of things to them, "Hey, welcome to the best job in the world," and I am biased.
Yeah,
Um, but I also said that, I remember speaking to some trainees on my 31st year anniversary, and I said, 31 years has gone by in a whiz, but I would do it all again in a heartbeat. And there's a little bit of me that envies what you've got ahead of you, because, and it is easy to look back with rose tinted spectacles, and there is some hard yards, some hard times, and some tough nights, and some tough days,
yeah,
and it's a huge commitment. But I genuinely would do that again in a heartbeat, because when I think back to some of the times that I've had, the things we shared, the opportunities to make a difference, people, communities. Um, I would do it all again. And the people that I've had the benefit of working with, and some of the role models that I've taken from, I just feel so fortunate to have had that experience. Um, and then go back to my sort of childhood ambition, which was to be a firefighter.
yeah,
And do you know what? I'll always be proud that I've achieved and done that and got out the other end.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
proud to work with the people that I've worked with. So would I do it again? Absolutely would. Now, but I'm too old.
Yeah, you don't look it. That's the compliment that you've been waiting for. You don't look it.
Right,
Just
thanks, Dave.
just
You need to
one
adjust the resolution on your camera, I think, too.
Just one last thing, Carl, if you don't mind. We've talked about some very serious topics about mental health and well-being and your career in that. Can you relate to us any amusing incidents, any incidents that you can remember that stand out that that cause you some amusement without naming and shaming?
Yeah, I've thought, yeah, long and hard. People always sort of say, and there's been so many, some of which I can discuss, some of which I can't. I think one that stands out for me was, when I was back as a leading firefighter back on Red Watch, station I was working at the time, and we got called one to a flat fire in the centre of the town. And I was in charge of the fire engine pump, so we turned up and at the address outside the door, and it was a sort of a network of different flats, different access doors, and I could hear the smoke alarm going off. I could smell the smoke, and I instantly recognised it as a chip pan fire. So I said to the two breathe apparatus wearers, just to turn up and get the breathe apparatus started up, and I would go and literally civically entry to the flat. Now the number 47. So I went and tried the door, and the door was locked. So in my enthusiasm to kind of, it was kind of the first proper house fire I'd had, so I was keen to sort of get in. I went and got the sledgehammer off the truck and started to kick the door in with the sledgehammer. So I'm there, and it was a good sized door, so it was taking a few knocks and a few whacks and a few bits and pieces. So anyway, just with one of the strokes, I managed to catch the doorbell, and it came out on a curly, the spring came out on a curly spring. It's like a comedy pair of eyeballs that come out of it. Anyway, long story short, so I got the door in, and I sent the breathing apparatus team up the stairs. So as was practice at the time, well, still is, you do a 360. Maybe I should have done the 360 first. Well, I should have done 360, but I didn't. And I went round the side and I could see smoke right out of another door, other entrance to another flat. So clearly I'd kicked the wrong door in to this flat. So I literally went scurrying up the stairs and I could see there was a person slumped on the sofa with the chip pan going merrily away. And the layer of smoke was just above the head. So they were in, so literally all that, with that, the green apparatus team were telling me, there's no fire here, Cal. Well, yeah, you know, what you do, it's hard. You'll have to come round, and so they came down and rescued the gentleman
Yeah,
who was fine.
yeah,
So, naturally a little bit embarrassed about my enthusiasm, and it was the right door that we would been
yeah,
given, the right address, but it was the wrong flat. So, thinking that I got away with it, we went to station. There was a little bit, and we can take it, but thing, you know, I thought, right, we're on nights tomorrow night. By the time I get to work, everybody will have forgotten.
yeah.
And, when I got there upon night, I opened my locker, and on the inside of the locker taped to it was the doorbell with the big spring, and it says this note saying, "You clumsy bee,
Yeah,
swear it," and
yeah,
exclamation mark, exclamation mark, and it just this spring whacked me in the face, completely planted oil, and I just thought, "No, how we got away with it, have I?" And of
yeah,
course,
yeah.
naturally, at that point, you know, the
Fantastic.
kids were on me. So I think
Yeah,
that's one of the cleanup ones probably, or the more subtle
really.
ones, I say, but he stands out for me as, you know, the crew, very well-meaning, and it just
Yeah,
sort of defused it a little bit, but, yeah,
brilliant.
I'm happy to admit to that one.
Brilliant, Carl. Carl, I'd like to thank you for your time. I know that you're busy and you've got things on with the incident that you're helping out with, but I really do appreciate your time. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and thank you once again.
Dave, thank you so much for the opportunity, and it's nice to see you. All the best.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Carl.